All right, today's lesson is lesson 12-3, simplifying rational expressions. The objective today is to simplify rational expressions and state the excluded values.
A rational expression is an algebraic expression whose numerator and denominator are polynomials. So this number 1, go ahead and write that down, is an example of a rational expression. Basically, it's a fraction where, again, your top or your numerator and your denominator are both polynomials. Go ahead and write down number 1. We've got n squared minus 16 on the top and n squared plus 7m plus 12 on the bottom. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to factor the numerator or the top of our fraction, and then we're going to factor the denominator or the bottom part of our fraction. So we're going to do that first. So I'm going to look at the top part here. I have n squared minus 16. Now it's a binomial, and the only two ways I can factor binomials, meaning two terms, is GCF and perfect squares. Now the n squared and the 16 do not have a GCF because they don't have anything in common. However, n squared is a perfect square, 16 is a perfect square, and we have that minus sign in the middle. So I can use perfect squares to factor. So over here I'm going to say n squared minus 16. N squared breaks up into n and n. 16 breaks down into 4 and 4, and when it's a binomial like this, we have a plus sign in one and a minus sign in the other. So we have n plus 4 and n minus 4. So we factored the top. We come down here, we've got n plus 4 and n minus 4. And then we have to factor the denominator, the n squared plus 7m plus 12. And to factor that, we have to use our factor by grouping method that we learned. There is no GCF here because, again, there's no number in front here and the 12 doesn't have an n. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 1. I'm going to go ahead and factor this. I'm going to multiply the first and last. So 1 times 12 is 12. And then I'm going to look at my factor sheet for my factors of 12. That's 1 and 12. 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So then I'm going to look and say which of these factors add to this 7. That would be the 3 and 4. So I'm going to split it up, 3n and 4n. And then I'm going to factor by grouping. I'm going to group the first two and the last two. The first one I just have a 1n, and I have n plus 3 left. And then 4 and 12 have a 4 in common, and it's positive because that front number right there is positive. And I have 1n, or just n, plus 3. Again, what's in my parentheses matches, and it has to. So that's going to be one set of parentheses. I'm going to drop the 1s in front of the n's and just say n plus 3 and n plus 4. So the bottom part of our fraction is going to be n plus 4 and n plus 3. Okay, so that's our first step. Our first step is to factor the numerator and factor the denominator. Our second step are to look for what's called excluded values. And those excluded values are what makes the denominator 0. Because we're not allowed to have 0 in the denominator. If you try to divide a number by 0, it's going to say error because it can't happen. So to find those, I've got two different ways that I can do that. I can look at this and say, what can I put in for n that if I add 4 will give me 0? Or I can actually just come down here and set it equal to 0. N plus 4 equals 0 or does not equal 0. And when I subtract my 4, then I find out that n is not allowed to be negative 4. Because if I plug in negative 4 here, negative 4 plus 4 would give me 0 in the denominator, and I can't have that. Then I set the n plus 3 equal to 0. Subtract the 3. So n is also not allowed to be negative 3. So those are my excluded values. Right, so I'm going to come back up here to my original, and I'm going to state my excluded values, and we're going to denote that with EV for excluded values. And my excluded values are negative 3 and negative 4, and negative 4 and negative 3. So those are the values that x is not allowed to be. So those are my excluded. That's part of my answer. And then after I have them both factored, I'm going to look and say, okay, what's the same on the top and the bottom that I can mark out? Well, both the top and the bottom both have an n plus 4. Now, I can't just mark out the 4's here because of the plus sign, but if it's n plus 4 and they're exactly the same in the parentheses, I can mark those out. Now I'm going to say, okay, what do I have left? Well, on the top I have n minus 4 left, and on the bottom I have n plus 3 left. So this is my simplified rational expression. So please make sure that you have all of this work down before you move on. All right, go ahead and write down number 2. We have 3k squared plus 12k as our numerator, and we have k squared plus 8k plus 16 as our denominator. So again, I've got to factor the top and factor the bottom. So if I look at the numerator first, or the top, we have 3k squared plus 12k. It's a binomial, and we talked about the only way to factor binomials are GCF and perfect squares. Well, 3 and 12 are not perfect squares. However, I do have a GCF here. If I look at 3 and 12 on my factor sheet, they have a 3 in common. And also both of these have a k. So I can also take out a k. So we're going to take out a GCF of a 3k. So 3 divided by 3 will give me 1. I had 2 k's. I took 1 out, so I have 1 left. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And I had a k, but I took that k out. So there's the first part, or the numerator. So my numerator is 3k, parentheses, k plus 4, because again, I don't really need that 1 in front of my k. So then we're going to factor out the denominator, k squared plus 8k plus 16. This one is a trinomial, so I need to look for a GCF, and there's not one. So that I'm going to factor, I'm going to put my 1 in front and say 1 times 16. Now I'm going to list my factors for 16. 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. So I have to figure out which of those gives me 8, and that would be the 4 and 4. So I'm going to split the 8k up into 4k and 4k, bring down my 16 and my 1k squared, and group them. When I look at the first two, the only thing that they have in common is a 1 and a k. And I have 1k plus 4 left. The second one, 4 and 16, have a 4 in common. And it's positive, because that front number there is positive. And I have a 1k, and then 16 divided by 4 is 4. Again, what's in my parentheses match, and it has to. So I have 1k plus 4. And 1k plus 4. So again, I'm going to drop my 1's in front and just call it k plus 4 and k plus 4. Now, once I get everything factored, I'm going to stop and look for those excluded values. So I'm going to look at only the denominator, because I'm only worried about the denominator being 0. Since these are exactly the same, I only actually have to find one excluded value. So I'm going to say k plus 4 equals to 0. So I need to figure out what's going to make that 0. Subtract the 4, and k is not allowed to be negative 4. So my excluded value is just negative 4 here. The reason being, if I said k plus 4 equals 0 again, I'm still going to get negative 4. So my one excluded value is negative 4. Now that I have my excluded values, I'm going to look and say, okay, what's the same on the top and the bottom that I can cancel? And I have a k plus 4 on the numerator and a k plus 4 in the denominator, so I can mark those out. Now, I can't mark out this one because I don't have another k plus 4 on the top to mark it out with. So for one on the top that I can mark out, I can only mark out one of the ones on the bottom. So we're going to look and say, okay, what do we have left? We have 3k on the top and k plus 4 on the bottom. So there's my simplified rational expression. Please make sure that you have all of the work written before you move on. Go ahead and write down number 3. Our numerator is 2d minus 3, and our denominator is 2d squared minus 13d plus 15. So again, just like what I've been doing, I'm going to factor the numerator and factor the denominator. So if I look at 2d minus 3. Again, it's a binomial, so all I can do is take out a GCF or perfect squares. 2 and 3 are definitely not perfect squares, and 2 and 3 don't have anything in common other than a 1. So there's no way for me to factor this. It's actually prime or simple, or it's factored by itself. So there's nothing I can do to factor this. So we're just going to leave it as 2D minus 3. So if you can't factor it, just leave it. So we're good there. Now we've got to look at the denominator, the 2D squared minus 13D plus 15. I look at 2, 13, and 15, and there is no GCF there. So I'm going to multiply the first and the last here and say 2 times 15 is 30. Right, so then I'm going to list my factors for 30. I have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, and that's it. Alright, so since I need this number that it's adding to be negative, then all my numbers are going to be negative. Now I need to add to a negative 13, so that would be negative 3 and negative 10. So I'm going to split this up and say negative 3D and negative 10D. Bring down my 15 and my 2D squared. And then again I'm going to group. So here, 2 and 3 only have a 1 in common, so I'm going to take out a 1 and a D, because they do have that D in common. They both have at least 1. So I'm going to be left with 2D minus 3. And then 10 and 15 have a 5 in common, and it's going to be a negative 5 because of the negative right here. So I'm going to have 10 divided by 10 divided by 5 is 2D, and then 15 divided by negative 5 is negative 3. Again, they match in the parentheses, and they're supposed to. So when I bring it down, I'm going to have D minus 5 from the outside and 2D minus 3 from my parentheses. So in the denominator, I'm going to have D minus 5 and 2D minus 3. Again, once I have everything factored, the numerator and denominator, I need to look for those excluded values. So I need to set my denominator factors equal to 0. So I'm going to say D minus 5 equals 0. Add 5. So D is not allowed to be 5. And then 2D minus 3 equal to 0. Add the 3. 2D equals 3. Divide by the 2. And D is not allowed to be 3 over 2. So over here at my excluded values, they're going to be 5 and 3 over 2. Or 3 over 2 and 5 would be even better. Alright, now we're going to look and say, okay, what can I cancel? That's the same on the top and the bottom. On the top I have a 2D minus 3, and on the bottom I have a 2D minus 3. So I can go ahead and cancel those. And I'm going to write down what we have left. I don't have anything left on the top because it's been marked out. So I'm just going to put a 1. So if everything's been marked out on the top, you have to have the 1 there. And then on the bottom I have D minus 5. So there's my simplified rational expression. Again, please make sure that you have all of that work down before you move on.
All right, go ahead and get down number 4. It's m squared minus 5m plus 6 over m squared minus 5m minus 6. So the first thing we're going to do is factor the numerator. M squared minus 5m plus 6. And we're going to multiply our first term times our last term, which is going to give us 1 times 6, which equals 6. And then we're going to list our factors of 6, which are 1 times 6, 2 times 3. So we're going to see which factors will give us positive 6 and negative 5m. So in order to get a positive 6 but a negative sum, that means that both of our numbers have to be negative. So is it negative 1 and negative 6 or negative 2 and negative 3 that will give us negative 5? We know that it's negative 2 and negative 3. So we're going to break this down to negative 2m minus 3m. Bring down our 6 and bring down our m squared. And then we're going to factor our first set by taking out an m. And it's going to give us m minus 2. And then our second set by taking out a negative 3, which is going to give us m minus 2. So in parentheses, we have m minus 2 and m minus 3. And that's going to be our numerator. So now let's factor our denominator. It's m squared minus 5m minus 6. Multiply 1 times negative 6. It's going to give us negative 6. So our factors are going to be either 1 times negative 6 or 2 times negative 3. When I add them together, it's the 1 plus negative 6. It's going to give me negative 5. So that's going to be plus 1m minus 6m. Bring down my minus 6. Bring down my m squared. And then I'm going to factor my groups. I have m here, m plus 1. And then here I'm going to take out a negative 6, which is going to give me m plus 1. So in my parentheses, I have m minus 6 and m plus 1. So I'm going to bring that up and put that in my denominator. M plus 6 and m plus 1. I'm sorry, m minus 6. Just a second, let me fix that one. Alright, so that again should be m minus 6 and m plus 1. Now I have to find my excluded values because my denominator cannot equal 0. So I'm going to set my m minus 6 equal to 0. I add 6 on both sides, and that tells me that m may not equal 6. And then here I have my m plus 1 from here cannot equal 0. So if I subtract 1 from both sides, m cannot equal negative 1. So my excluded values are going to be 6 and negative 1. I'm running out of space. So we go back and we look at the problem. Let me fix this. Hold on. All right, we go back and we look at the fully factored version of the problem here with my m minus 2, m minus 3 over m minus 6, m plus 1, and you see that nothing there cancels. So that's fine. It's fully simplified. There's nothing else that I can cancel. So we just leave it at that. Make sure that you have all of that down before you move on. Go ahead and get down number 5. It's 15 minus 5x over 4x minus 12. Now I have a binomial on the top and on the bottom, so I know that I'm going to be factoring out a GCF or perfect squares, and these are not perfect squares, so it is going to be factoring out a GCF. So on the top, I have 15 minus 5. The GCF of 15 and 5 is going to be 5, so I'm going to factor out a 5 here, and it's going to leave me with 3 minus x. And on the bottom, I have 4x minus 12. The GCF between 4 and 12 is going to be 4, so I'm going to factor out a 4, and that's going to leave me with x minus 3. All right. Here I'm going to find my excluded values. So I'm going to find my excluded value by taking what I have in parentheses here, the x minus 3, and setting it equal to 0. So x minus 3 may not equal 0. If I add 3 on both sides, it's telling me that x may not equal 3. The reason for that being that whatever I get in the parentheses, I'm going to multiply by the 4. So if 4 times 0 is going to equal 0, and that's not okay to have in my denominator. So my excluded value here is just going to be 3. So now I'm going to look at simplifying, and I have this little issue here that we haven't seen yet before, in that I have a positive 3 and a negative x on top, but a positive x and a negative 3 on the bottom. So I have opposites here. I can still cancel these out, but in order to do that, I have to multiply everything inside one set of parentheses by a negative 1. So here, I have to factor out a negative 1 in order to change the sign, and it's going to make this cancel and that cancel. So I'm going to be left with 5 times negative 1 over 4, which is going to give me negative 5 over 4. And that's going to end up being my final answer there on that one. All right, go ahead and get down number 6. Number 6 is 18 minus 6r over 2r squared plus 8r minus 42. The first thing we're going to do here is factor our numerator. And if I look at my factor sheet at 18 and 6, I will see that my greatest common factor is going to be 6. When I factor out a 6, it gives me 3 minus 1r, and that's going to be my numerator. Now I'm going to look at my denominator, 2r squared plus 8r minus 42, and the first thing I'm going to do is see if I have a GCF between 2, 8, and 42, and I do. I can go ahead and pull out a GCF of 2 here, which is going to leave me with r squared plus 4r minus 21, right? Yeah. All right, so now I'm going to look at my first and last terms, which are going to be 1 times negative 21, and that's going to give me a product of negative 21. So I'm going to look at 21 on my factor sheet, and I could have, it's going to equal, whatever I'm adding is going to have to equal a positive 4, so I'm going to do negative 1 times 21, or negative 3 times 7. Negative 3 plus 7 is going to give me 4. So I'm going to break that down into negative 3r plus 7r, bring down my 21. Sorry, that's a negative 21. And bring down my r squared. Now I'm going to look at my groups. I'm going to factor out an r here, which is going to leave me with r minus 3. I'm going to factor out a 7 here, which is going to leave me with r minus 3. So in my parentheses, I'm going to have r plus 7, r minus 3, and then I can't forget my GCF that I pulled out goes back in the front. So that's going to be my denominator. It's going to be 2, r plus 7, r minus 3. So I can see here, now I have to go ahead and find my excluded values. So again, I'm going to look at what's in parentheses, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. So I have r plus 7 cannot equal 0. So if I subtract 7 from both sides, r cannot equal negative 7. And then r minus 3 cannot equal 0. So if I add 3 on both sides, r cannot equal 3. So my excluded values are going to be negative 7, 3. Okay, and then I'm going to go back up to my problem and look and see what I can further simplify. So I have another situation where I have opposites here. I have a positive 3 and a negative r on top. We can go ahead and get rid of that 1. Positive 3 and a negative r on top, and then I have a positive r and a negative 3 on the bottom. So again, I can cancel these, but in order to do that, I have to either, you can say pull out a negative 1 or multiply by a negative 1. So I'm going to put my negative 1 here, go ahead and cancel those, get them out of the way. And then I'm going to rewrite my problem with those canceled. So it's going to give me, I need to move down a little bit because I'm running out of space. It's going to give me 6 times negative 1 and 2 times r plus 7. So that's going to further simplify just slightly as, I'm going to say negative 6. Oh, okay. over 2 times r plus 7, and then I can simplify my 6 and my 2 by reducing it down to a negative 3. And because it's over 1, I don't have to write the 1. It will just be r plus 7, because negative 6 divided by 2 gives me negative 3. All right, so this is your final answer. This is your fully simplified version here. You have negative 3 over r plus 7. All right, go ahead and copy down your homework assignment. It's lesson 12-3, page 890. You're going to be doing 12 through 20, just the evens, 34 through 38, again the evens, and 56, which is a total of 10 problems. And you're going to state the excluded values on all problems, as well as fully simplifying the rational expressions. When you're done writing that down, this is the end of your video. Thank you for watching.